Welcome to Effective Change, a podcast sharing the journeys of people who have created social impact. In each episode, we explore the meaning of real social impact and find out how business and enterprise leaders have found ways to make a difference in their communities. Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm really excited to be hosting today's episode with Nat. We hope you're all well. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Amanda Sung, who is the founder and director of Arts for Good Foundation based in Hong Kong. So good morning, Amanda. To get started off, we're just going to ask you a couple of quickfire questions, if that's okay. Can you describe yourself in 3 words?
Thank you, Ellie. So I'm Amanda Sun. In 3 words, I am very passionate, very determined, and also very resilient.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, second quickfire question. We were wondering, especially as your organization is related to the arts, if you have a preference between abstract art or more realism.
No, we don't have preference, but we do look more at contemporary art than classic art.
Oh, that's interesting. And finally, last quickfire question. Who inspires you and why?
I think it's my personal experience in Hong Kong, what I've been experienced, what me and my families and the people around me, that with our life experience, particularly in the past 3-4 years.
That sounds amazing. Well, I'm really looking forward to finding out more. Could you tell us, first of all, a little bit about Arts for Good Foundation and what social impact it's having?
I think Arts for Good Foundation is a value-driven social enterprise with a social mission of fostering social inclusion through the soft power of art and culture. The social impact we are delivering is actually, we are emphasizing a lot on the soft power of art and culture that given to younger generations and give to our each individual. I think the other social impact we are very enthusiastic to create with the younger generation is to foster perspective, particularly in the nowadays with overwhelming information from multiple resources.
I think that's really interesting and really important as well, especially what you're saying about the different perspectives, because it's really vital for young people to be exposed to different lives, to different kind of cultures and ways of thinking, because that's one of the ways that we can increase tolerance of differences. Could you tell us a little bit more about how Arts for Good Foundation came about? What's the story behind it? Were there any challenges that you found to setting up the foundation, specifically trying to do it in Hong Kong?
I think it's starting from my within, deeper feelings about my experience in Hong Kong. I came to Hong Kong 10 years ago without speaking any Cantonese. It's been a long journey of me trying to find myself and also my family in the place. And growing up in China in 80s and 90s, it's a life without much materialistic resources, but really a journey of witnessing changes. That was my childhood. Growing up in Canada, I feel like there's just a lot of diversities and multicultures, kindness, tolerance, embracing differences, which I feel deeply disconnected in Hong Kong for the past quite a few years. So I think setting up the foundation is really my deeper reflection of who I am, what the values are important to me from my life experience in China in a very particular liberal, but it's also a changing making period of time. And also in a multicultural place in Canada. And how do I make changes in Hong Kong? What is a new perspective I can bring into Hong Kong society and the younger generation to look at Hong Kong and looking at the world with different perspectives? So that's how really I started. And I've been thinking about, particularly in a very different year in 2019, about what is really the commonalities between people from with extremely different opinions on very variety of issues in Hong Kong. So I've always been an art lover. My dad is a big advocate of recreation and leisure programs since I was a kid. So from my childhood, I've been deeply influenced by his enthusiasm in sports and recreation programs. And I think, and I, as a person who is a big art lover, I deeply feel the beauty of art is a civic common that everybody connect to it. So that's exactly really how I started. I really trying to see what is the commonalities in our society that people people feel they're connected, and how do we bring people together and kind of building that reconnection and communities together. So yeah, as you said, there are challenges of setting up companies, foundation, NGOs in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is an extremely developed place and also requires a very high level of professionalism and elites in variety of areas, I would say. I always telling people that I am not any professional specialist in art. I'm not a teacher in classroom. I feel like what the new perspectives I'm bringing into the learning is how do we build connectivity in learning, in ourselves, with our society, rather than looking at things from professionalistic point of view in one subject. How do we bring that connectivity, interdisciplinary exploration for younger generations to really looking at differences from really different angles? So I think that's a beginning of the setup is the challenge. I've been asked a lot if I'm an art therapist, which I'm not. I've been asked a lot if I'm a classroom teacher, which I'm not. I think for education enterprise to bring new perspective, I really have to position myself and my strengths and the values are important to me and the values I want to bring it out through Arts for Good Foundation.
What an amazing childhood and experience to go from growing up in China and then to move to Canada and then to move to Hong Kong. That must really have just been so different, but also so rich in the experiences that you've had. And I really loved what you were saying about you're trying to develop or trying to explore the commonalities in our society. And I think that's so important at this moment in time when we're becoming more and more polarized. I was wondering about your perspective on whether or not you think we can measure effective social impact. And do you think that we can measure effective social impact? And do you think it's measurable within the Arts for Good Foundation?
Yes, definitely. I think social impact measurement is always a huge tackle area that all the NGOs and foundations and social enterprises are trying to tackle. We definitely can measure social impacts from variety of resources. I feel like my personal journey of my career is actually very interesting. I started as a market researcher in a global consulting firm. So my first job was trying to measure customers' satisfaction. I think now when I look back, it's actually helped me a lot to think about how do we really measure the very soft skills that arts can bring, completely measure through questionnaires, through focus group, through sharing. I think we actually constantly collecting all those feedback. I think the change of drive for people to learn about art, having that incentive and desire to connect with the people in the community, all those simple questions, we already measuring the social impact through questionnaires, but it's a long accumulative, measurement. It's not a one-off. It definitely needs time, but it's definitely measurable. And the other thing we did believe is actually the power of storytelling. Rather than looking at the data, we also compiling the stories. Either as our participants, social workers, we are creating those database of the stories that we created. How do we change each person's life?
And how is it that you get to work with these groups of young people? Do they approach Arts for Good Foundation? Do you go into schools?
Yeah, we actually that went through different stages. At the beginning, we really to rely on our own personal connections and try to reach out and see how do we have actually done a lot of trials before we set the target age. We actually tried different ages. We tried a 7, we tried a 16, 18 within a very small group. So we really reach out at the beginning and try different age group and see what is the best fit and how do we tailor our programs to different ages. And then slowly we collaborate with NGOs or collaborating with other social enterprises and try to outreach and collaboratively making programs together. And actually now we really more want to focus on schools to build things more systematically and structured and to benefit more students on a regular basis. So it's all ongoing, but it's evolved, it's progressing.
Okay, it sounds really exciting. And did you find then that there was one particular age group that was more receptive or more open?
So we actually divided our art programs from very different pillars. We have art viewing, art making, and for the older youth university, we wanted them to do community service learning through art. So the focus is more on how do we using art in community service. But then art viewing, it's more for like younger, probably upper primary, like about 10 to 12. And then art making is we open up to the all ages, depending on the particular art form that we are making. So yeah, we are very tailored making our programs to the age and the suitability of the beneficiaries.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love the idea of these different strands of art making and art viewing, and it just sounds really exciting. So linking a little bit to what you were just saying, I'm wondering if what your direction is for the future, how you would like to expand Arts for Good Foundation, how would you like to expand the social impact?
I am actually definitely a dreamer. I think that a big skill I had since my childhood, growing up with nothing. We were educated in a way to dream, to make differences, to how to make changes, to create things that was not existing in 80s and 90s. So I definitely a dreamer. I don't know how difficult it is to be in Hong Kong, but I definitely to want art viewing and art making to be part of the school curriculums, particularly for a lot of local and traditional schools. Hong Kong is very, very diverse and different, even in the education system. We feel there was a huge need to have arts and the openness of art created, thinking skills, that perspective that art delivers to traditional schools, which are more of exam-driven and content and knowledge-based learning. So we definitely want to push boundaries and try to introduce the arts to very different school systems. And that's my long-term vision. And then the impact we are making it on the way. We also try the different ways. If the school is not working, then we go for NGOs. As long as we can reach to children, the target is children. It's not about how do we get to the children. The ultimate beneficiary is the children that we want to serve.
That's fantastic. There's so much focus on data and testing and results and scores. My background is in education, and what has happened is that children have received such a narrow curriculum that only really focuses on calculation or transcription or grammar or things that are so sort of narrow in their focus. And what we then lose is that, like you were saying, that imagination, that creativity, that ability to dream something up, which is what the world needs. We need inventions, we need creativity, we need engineers like Nat who are going to, build things and find solutions for problems. And so I love this idea that you're trying to address that aspect that is perhaps missing in some school curriculums of opening children's minds up to these broader experiences. It sounds brilliant.
I am a deep believer in connectivity, connecting learning. I do believe the world is all connected. I don't know where I get it from, but I kind of vividly remembered when I was a young kid in China, we have those like philosophy classes and talking about the world is interconnected and things like that. And I really deeply believe how the things are connected, particular things from, the pandemic and how the world has all those issues around. I think the children need to be aware of that the decision making or their actions, is maybe also connect to other aspects in the world that live in. This is really important skills that arts can bring it because it's so multidisciplinary, and then just push the boundaries and thinking out of the box. So this is what we are striving to make changes with.
That's brilliant, because I completely agree with you that we are living in a global world now, that we have this ability to communicate and connect. It's vital that children are being exposed to different skills and different aspects and different perspectives. I'm going to pass over to Nat.
Thank you, Amanda, for explaining what Arts for Good's Foundation is doing. There's lots of aspects that you mentioned about your own experience transitioning and witnessing changes from non-materialistic to maybe more of a materialistic world, and witnessing the different kindness you witnessed abroad in Canada, and how this made you feel that you want to make a change into helping other young people to look at the world from different perspectives and spotting commonalities. I think you mentioned a lot about how you're cultivating this environment for these young people. So this leads to, why do you think inclusivity and diversity are so important, particularly for young people?
I think the world is going through a huge change of differences individually. There's so many choices right now that I would never had before when I was a kid. I feel like the world is vastly changing, and there's so individual being so respected in a way in making choices, right, in the society. So that's why I feel inclusivity and diversity become a main issue, or not issue, but really a focus of the future. Like, how do we see the differences? How do we we, in a society, how do we make everybody feel they're being included, even though with their differences? That's why Arts for Good is looking at the differences from that culture. How do we foster the perspective, being inclusive, to see other differences for the younger generations, particularly, to cope with the changing world and when they're little young. With all the technology intervention, actually, how do they cope with that when, they're only facing the screen, but with reduced real life, very sensory experience to see all those differences. So yeah, this is my deep belief of how do we see the differences and diversity and inclusion in the future.
Thank you, Amanda, for such an insightful in why inclusivity and diversity are important, because I feel like inclusivity and diversity sort of slots into elements about emotional intelligence, a little bit about the empathetic aspect, which is a strong element that I think young people nowadays seem to be lacking due to the pandemic, particularly nowadays with not being able to interact with their friends, with their peers. I actually witnessed this with my younger siblings. So they're actually in secondary school at the moment. They're quite young. And I've been speaking to teachers as well within this area, because another project I've been working on is about emotional intelligence. And a lot of them mentioned the lack of resilience, especially the things you were saying, the lack of resilience, lack of self-awareness, not being able to be very empathetic for others and themselves as well, and what that means to them. It's definitely a very interesting area that you're focusing on and trying to emphasize on through Arts for Good Foundation. You actually also mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, that you really strong believe that there's a strong emphasis on how art is a form of soft power. And I would love to dive into why is that.
I'm actually very glad that you asked me 3 questions to describe myself at the beginning of the interview. I have actually been reflecting for a really, really long time, where did I get that soft skills from? Like, how do I cope with adversity, difficulties, even dramatic and traumatic changes in my life? I feel, where is the soft power coming from? Is how do I get that, right? Able to witness the changes, being able to imagine the different places, different life, is something coming from within your own way of looking at the world. How do you want to live in the world? How do you find yourself? How do you find yourself to connect to the people around you and the society? It's all coming from within. This is a new perspective I want to try to bring to arts in Hong Kong, is think about art can build that intrinsic strength for young individuals, not more of extrinsic kind of a therapy or healing. You have a problem, you go for a therapist, really making as kind of a belonging, natural way in our life, and then giving their own core strength for the young individuals. Artist life journey is extremely difficult life journey. If you learn the stories, how do they become artists? What they believe in, that they could be suffering for a really long time before they can be even being recognized. Where does that skills coming from? How do they sustain themselves? Is that belief in themselves? Is that coming from them kind of a self to looking at their own way of creating things that did not exist? So this is the soft skills that the younger generations really needs to know. It doesn't matter they wanted to be an artist or not artist, but then in the way of giving them the soft skills to having that resilience, looking at difficult lives, kind of like adversities, having that power of reimagining things, having that endurance of experience going through the process of it. Younger generation are so used to something coming very instantly, particularly with all those technologies and a lot of help. The younger generation, particularly in Hong Kong, right? Kids all grow up with helpers. Art is the process. The art is the story of people's life. Art is how do we deal with adversity? How do we looking at life from very different angles, different perspectives? So this is all the soft skills I feel like the younger generation needs to be embedded with, coming from within and looking outward.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Amanda. The way that you describe art as a form of soft power sort of triggered into my mindset that it's essentially cultivating this growth mindset that young people should have, and ultimately not thinking about the outcome, as you mentioned, but the journey they take. I think within the Hong Kong education system, particularly, I feel like a lot of it is about the outcome rather than how you get there, the process of getting there. It's very, very intense. You mentioned a little bit about the activities you have at Arts for Good Foundation. So art viewing for younger people, and there's art making for all ages. I was wondering, when you were designing all these activities, were there any particular challenges in cultivating the message of social inclusion and diversity into your activities and programs?
Yes, absolutely. There's always a challenges, but I always believe there's a way in when there's a belief. In the past 2 years, there's always a way in with all the pandemic, with the challenges, social distancing, and we ended up okay. We ended up we be able to get things we need to do, then we need to be able to get the resources we need, the art making and art viewing. Loving art is actually nurturing of a curiosity, a curious mind. I've been always saying myself as a learner, like I learn from so many things from students and artists. Having that learning mindset is so important because you open up so many possibilities in your journey of life. Art making is a way of kind of delivering that making culture, seeing the difference in the process. And then during the process is a way that we connect. That's why when we designing those programs, how do I feel? How do I be able to creating that feeling, make it relevant to the children is a key element that we're looking at. We started the program by imagining, can they feel it? Can they really connect to the message that we wanted to tell first? I feel that's a really key element, how we looking at the programs before we implement. I think at the startup, they are very good at having the choices, being creative rather than establish the system or establish a company. So I think that's the way I found the entrepreneur is very, very interesting. I've been feeling like I've been constantly creating things that are driven by my heart, by my shared feeling that I believe that I can give it to the younger generation.
100% agree with that. I think when you're a startup in this entrepreneurship environment, it's that vision of the end mission you have, that really long-term vision that you mentioned of making arts beneficiary for children, you mentioned earlier. I love that. I'm assuming also like between the culture in Hong Kong, there might be some barriers for children to adopt new activities. How do you actually overcome that barrier?
That's always a barrier in outreaching and implementing programs. I think I focus a lot on who I advocate to. I think we really try to connect with NGOs, the schools, or even our collaborating organizations that believe the values that we're bringing. We were not very successful, certain demographic parent actually, because very result driven, and children are actually being scheduled a lot of activities and piano exam, this exam, that. On the way, at the beginning, we will actually have supporters from parents who are more embraced to the variety of art and what is the impact art can bring. It changes art to bring it to our children, particularly community element that we can bring it to the children by mixing age group, mixing very different demographic backgrounds of children. So that's how we started. And the kids, I think the parents feel the needs, that kids need to be connected with the community. But right now, we really try to establish more of a long-term and stable collaboration of friendship with NGOs and schools, try to implement this in a more systematic way.
So how do you see conversations and actions on the community inclusivity and diversity evolve with technology in the future?
I definitely had a lot of thoughts, particularly during the fifth waves of the pandemic in Hong Kong, that we were not able to do any of the face-to-face programs, that we really have to looking for new alternatives. I think being able to have a collaborator or having a platform that enable Arts for Good Foundation, connect with other fund companies or enterprises who are specializing in technology is so important in creating collective impact. So we are very eager to outreach, to know people, knowing that, expertise. I think this is one of the reasons I'm also being an ambassador of Dream Impact. They have helped over 160 organizations, social purpose organizations in Hong Kong. So we're really eager to connect. And I think in the future, no foundation or organization can creating bigger impact by themselves. It's always about collaboration. How do we work together? How do we find a common ground, common values to work together? So that's extremely important, being part of the partner for Dream Impact as well.
That's really interesting. I also relate what you mentioned about how the collaborativeness between, for example, you and Dream Impact sort of goes back to what you mentioned about your belief in connectivity. To sort of summarize this episode, if you have one piece of advice for our audience interested in actually starting a social enterprise, what would it be?
It needs time. I feel like things needs to have a certain period of time to be able to see the result. And then I think it's the soft skills I have again, to be able to have the endurance of witness the process of it, enjoying the journey as well. I don't know I'm the right person to answer this question, but I am a strong belief in values. Believe what you believe initially. I'm not a quick profit seeking person. So I'm very believe in things, the visions I have, although it takes time. I think for young startups, it's really about your belief of yourself and the values you want to deliver. because in the process, there's so many chances that it's going to go somewhere else. If you make a wrong call that's not driven by your initial belief, or it's not your vision, not the things that align with who you are, I think that values that you have, it's very important in building your own company and your enterprise. So that's probably my advice. And also, I'm actually constantly learning. I mean, as an entrepreneur, is actually a non-stop learner. I mean, I've been so amazed in the past 2 years. I've learned so many things that would never been part of my expertise. But I think being an entrepreneur is a learner. So it's how you get people together to help you. And also another way to influence people. We have amazingly, having over 200 volunteers help us in the past 2 years with all different kind of skills. I talk to a lot of people that I would never be able to get a sort of funding or donation or whatever, that be able to having that many skills that the volunteer contribute to the foundation that at the beginning. So really looking at things, the other values that your people, team, or your environment or your network can bring it to your foundation, helping you to build a company, building a vision that you believe in. I'm very, very grateful. I've seen your last question. I think that's a great question of how do we looking at other resources, other values that can bring it in and help you grow the enterprise.
And that's brilliant. And aspect you mentioned about how you're constantly learning as an entrepreneur really resonates with me, because I always sort of feel that I'm a sponge. If I can go into every conversation and learn one thing new about that person or what she or he is doing, that would be brilliant, because there's so much to learn about each individual. And you've also mentioned the power of storytelling. They all have stories. Everyone has a story. I know Hong Kong has opened up slightly now, and I hope the programs are running in person now. Are they running in person now?
Yes, we are resuming in person. We're designing programs for the summer and for the September as well. I mean, we're still in the process of starting up, I would say. It's not at the mature model of operation and completely self-sustained yet, but it's very aspiring that we have been achieved in the past less than 2 years during the pandemic time. I think the support from the volunteers is really encouraging me and motivating me a lot, particularly from young people, I believe, a lot of university students. I think the eagerness to connect with the world, to make differences for Hong Kong, I think that's our shared love for Hong Kong. And that's really, really beautiful. I think every people wanted to make changes to Hong Kong. And we found these commonalities. People can contribute their skills, their talents. And that's extremely inspiring and motivating as well. And so as an entrepreneur, I think I keep going on being motivated by the young people as well. I mean, like every time I was reached out by young people and say, I want to help you with this and this, that's extremely, extremely touching, actually.
That's brilliant to hear. And one last question for Korea or maybe audience in Hong Kong is, how can audience potentially support you and Ask for Good Foundation?
We are always eager to connect with young kids, young children, or young youth, whoever who have artistic talents, who want to bring their arts, talents to the community, who wanted to be volunteers, or just spread the word. It's also helping. We wanted to know more people to know about us and to know what we're doing and what we believe in. And we slowly building on the portfolios of our program. Value time a lot in Arts for the Foundation. We have a lot of skill-based volunteers give us a lunch hour, 1 hour to do the newsletter proofreading. I mean, like, where do I get those communication specialists, right? As a startup, these are extremely, extremely appreciated.
Thank you, Amanda. And for those listening, whether you want to be involved as a young person, as part of a program or volunteer, reach out to Amanda. Thank you very much, Amanda, once again for coming on this podcast. You have been an absolute pleasure to have interviews, I think, from both Elia and I. We've learned so much from you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You can now find us on Spotify, Anchor, Google, TuneIn and Stitcher. If you liked our discussion today, please follow and share. You can also see our daily posts and updates on LinkedIn, Instagram and Twitter.